Lea Durante is a family nurse practitioner turned integrative health coach. She wields quick, science based techniques for potent mental and physical transformations. Lea guides individual clients in her signature coaching work, the integration experience, and tailors impactful stress reduction and wellness programs for corporate teams. As a co host of the From Your Centre podcast, she shares resources, tools, and inspiration weekly. Welcome to the Digital Hive podcast, where we talk all things marketing for creative small businesses. This is one of those episodes where we talk about marketing more indirectly, but because the nervous system has such an impact on our whole body, how we feel, and on our life, it impacts how we show up in our marketing. Lea and I talk about how our nervous system operates when it's out of sync and what we can do about it in both the small moments and the short term, and how those efforts compound to helping us find that regulation. How we show up in our marketing impacts how much we can share, the messages we share, and also the quality and regularity of how we better connect with people, which gives us more advantages in making adjustments to improve our time and keep up or get ahead of what's happening around us. Plus, who doesn't want to have more of those good days when you're in flow and everything's moving the way it should? Since we are speaking about health in this episode, I'd just like to make clear that this isn't an alternative to personalized medical advice. This discussion doesn't and couldn't cover all aspects of health or even nervous system regulation. I highly encourage anyone who is listening to this episode knowing they have something going on in their health to not only evaluate it and do your due diligence, but to speak to a healthcare professional about it, or several, if that's what it takes. At a minimum, by referring to how your days are going, what tasks are feeling extra draining, and what habits you're defaulting to, you might find it helps to make decisions on the marketing you choose and how you approach that part of your business, since it's within your control. In business and in some parts of marketing, we talk about consistency, but that doesn't mean that every day is the same or that we do things equally. We can ride the wave and show up somewhat consistently and regularly, and those efforts can compound over time. Here's my conversation with Lea. Welcome to the podcast, Lea. It's so good to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, Emma. I'm thrilled to be here.
Amazing. To kick us off, tell us about you and your business.
Absolutely. So, I am a family nurse practitioner, over a decade in primary care practice, and I transitioned to become an integrative health coach and have my own online kind of virtual practice because I found the traditional model of writing prescriptions and referrals really wasn't helping people achieve the vibrancy in their mental and their physical health. So, I've pulled in a lot of really interesting evidence that we have about how our bodies actually work, how we actually create change in our life. And I really focus on helping, particularly women, decrease stress and decrease burnout. So, lots of fellow entrepreneurs, lots of busy professionals who come to me feeling like, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to just be happy and healthy and like get the things done that I want to get done? I'm passionate and I'm involved and I love what I'm doing, or but it just feels hard. So we create more ease by unlocking kind of the power of their nervous system and their subconscious mind to step out of that hamster wheel of stress and burnout.
Yeah, I love that. And I have felt that myself so much. I also just like that thing of essentially it's like, why continue walking through the like soft sand when you could
Yeah.
go up onto the tarmac or whatever, maybe even on just onto the hard sand, and being like, okay, well, what can I do about this, instead of just putting up with it and like gritting my teeth and bearing it. I have a history of chronic illnesses. So
Mm.
that very very physical, not so much mental, but physical sense
Mhm.
of feeling
Mhm.
that every day, but also being told by doctors that that was how it was gonna be for the rest of my life.
We're either kind of told this idea that it is just what it is. We checked it all out. There's quote unquote nothing wrong, or that you're just entirely broken and there's like not a solution for you. This is the best you can accept. I mean, we even, when you look at our health outcomes and you look at even prescription rates, medications help most conditions only about 30 to 50%. So half of people essentially we're writing these prescriptions for, even though we know the evidence isn't going to make a big difference in their life. So it's pretty sad that we l- leave that as our bar. Like
Yeah,
50% is our bar. Like, oh, just accept it. This is the way it's going to be. So
yeah,
I'm sorry that that's been your experience.
that's okay. I am seeing fantastic results now, so I'm
Yay.
very, very happy with it.
Good.
But by going through that, I feel like it's more when other people are talking about certain things that they're going through, it um, I have that more connection to it, so I ask more questions than maybe someone
Yeah.
who's never gone through a health thing like that before.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and you realize how common it is,
Mhm.
unfortunately. It's not normal, but it's common.
Exactly.
And how much people think they maybe have to grin and bear it. But the same thing happens to like just the things have changed throughout your life, and now this one thing has become a little bit harder than it used to be.
Mhm.
And that you don't have to just, people talk about like, oh, I get older, my hangovers are worse, or my knees hurt, or whatever. And it's like, you don't actually
Right.
have to put up with stuff. At least try, see if you can do
Right.
something about it. Those
Right.
tiny little optimizations that like make a big difference, especially like the compounding effects of them.
And particularly as women, there's just kind of this expectation that like stress and anxiety and I worry, I'm a worrier, and then with really high achievers, and people who are in business, this idea of kind of pushing through and and reaching those pinnacles and accomplishing your goals, and that everything has to be a push, and a struggle. And I think that we need a new narrative and a new understanding of how work can be, how life can be, without taking on that mental burden and that mental load, instead of just kind of expecting that it's always going to be there and suffering with it.
True. Yeah. Yeah. And the suffering is the piece that I think pushes a lot of people to maybe do something about it. But then you look back and see how long it really had been affecting you. Almost
Hmm.
that like grief process of after you get like maybe a diagnosis or something that starts working and you're like, "Oh, I wish I had this X many years ago."
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've seen you talk a bit about the nervous system, and like mental health and how it affects all of those things and how it works in our body. Can you explain for us how that whole process works?
Absolutely. So there is a theory called polyvagal theory that was actually discovered in the 1990s when they were studying newborn babies in the NICU. So understanding their heart rate and their breathing patterns because they were really vulnerable. And we found that our nervous system is a little bit more complex than what many of us were taught in grade school or high school biology or physiology, that we I feel like there's a pretty common understanding in our world of the fight or flight response, that kind of stress reaction, if we run into a saber-toothed tiger. Um, but what they found in studying these babies is it's not just fight or flight and rest and digest. Rest and digest is what's classically thought of as the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is these automatic reactions, right? This is how our body is responding to the environment. It's how it floods our body with different chemical messengers to respond to life. And what the nervous system is actually intended, it's not just for our protection in those life-threatening situations, but the nervous system is actually working to maintain and balance and give out the energy demands for the day. So it doesn't need an acute challenge, but that's what your nervous system is doing, is really managing your energy. And as they studied those babies, what they understood is that our nervous system is actually has about three different layers to it. So there's something called dorsal collapse, which is our most primitive reaction. That's the turtle hiding into the shell. If you, it's kind of the place of last resort. Then there's the sympathetic activation place, which is that fight or flight place, that cortisol place. That's the place that our society kind of tends to live in, this stress and our physiology responding to traffic and the emails, and just all of the onslaught of the news cycle and all those kinds of things that really reduce, and produce a lot of stress. Or again, as business owners, the cortisol of, am I going to meet my monthly numbers? Am I going to get the quarterly? Yeah, kind of this amped place. And then what's so interesting and what I think is so valuable for people is to understand what we consider the top of the nervous system is a place called ventral vagal. And ventral vagal is a place within your nervous system that allows you to be connected, calm, responsive to the environment instead of reactive. It's the place where you really feel like I can set the boundaries that I need to set. I can communicate with the people I need to set. I've got the energy I need to go through the day. I can focus when I need to. Like life feels good. Life feels in flow. We've all had those days where we're like, gosh, it's just rolling and I feel good. And my work is really helping people identify that you have the power within your own body to spend more and more time in that place, to live in your relationships more and more from that place, to work more and more from that place. And our body knows the way, which is what's so cool. It's mapped into our physiology, and becoming aware of some of those stressors that are just in our society and in our environment. No longer have to be triggers. We always think of like what's triggering me, but those triggers can kind of be, I like to say, messengers or maybe even friends to help point you back to that place of calm and connected and easeful, but impactful. It's not like, you know, after the yoga class where you're just blissed out on your yoga mat, but you're really engaged with life and kind of able to move forward in the way that you want.
So, what does a dysregulated nervous system actually like look and feel like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, our nervous system is intended to move flexibly between all of those states. The goal is not that we only hang out in ventral vagal. A dysregulated nervous system simply means that we get into fight or flight. And again, we all need that. We all still need that activation energy. There are times when it's appropriate to have that blood pumping into your skeletal muscles and have your heart beating and those things. The challenge is when we get stuck there. So when we receive a trigger from the environment and we have that flush of adrenaline or cortisol, and that and then we can't get back to the ventral vagal place. But again, I would call regulated is that you move flexibly, that you can comfortably move into each one. What I find is people who are dysregulated get stuck in the dorsal shutdown or the sympathetic activation. And when we're in that state, because it's a physiologic state, it's creating so many kind of chemical messengers from hormones and, again, kind of adrenaline at the beginning, cortisol longer term. And that can have a lot of health consequences too. So, people who stay stuck in the dorsal place struggle with things like weight gain and fatigue and fibromyalgia or kind of chronic pain things. It can be the place where there's hormone imbalance and thyroid imbalance, as well as kind of mental health challenges of feeling. That's probably more the place of more of a despair or just depression. When we get stuck in sympathetic activation, it's a revved up place. So that's the place where perhaps it's IBS, it's your bowels are, really irregular. Again, maybe you've got high blood pressure, your heart rate races. It's more of the place of anxiety and fear and worry. And so we see the manifestation of really common health issues when our nervous system gets stuck in those places and isn't flexibly able to move between the three states.
Mm. Oh, that makes so much sense. And I can actually think of times where I was probably in the various different ones. Um, Also, you have a quiz on your website if anyone wants to go and figure out what type they are.
Yeah. We tend towards we just in our kind of habits and who we've been and how we've interacted with the world, we all everybody, every human on the planet, we all have this nervous system, but we kind of tend towards one particular type or state more than the other. And so I think it's really helpful to understand just like where's my baseline? Because once we know, then that gives us the power to make change and see how to create more flexibility and movement within the system.
Oh, that's so good. Um, and also I feel like so often we are blaming that like outside cause of this or maybe like an internal thing that's going on with your body. But obviously there are things that people can do about it.
Mhm.
So how do you approach it with people of how do they start to work on these kind of things?
So I love to map your nervous system because, again, it gives so much internal power. Your experience of what sympathetic activation is going to feel slightly different than what it feels like for me. And when we get that embodied personal knowledge of what's going on, again, at in our physiology, then we can use both body-based techniques and cognitive techniques. So the vagal nerve that we were talking about, and again, what they were really studying in those little babies, it's really interesting. 80% of the fibers, they start in the body. So they're kind of taking the sensations and the experiences of what's happening in the body, and taking that information to the brain, and then the brain creates a story. So oftentimes, if we can change how the body is feeling, it will change how the brain interprets it. And then there's the other 20% too. So 20% of the time it's coming from our brain first and then sending toward the body. So that's where you can use things like thought work and kind of starting to become more aware of what's going on in the mind and the brain. So I like to use the dual approach, and I find people kind of gravitate towards one or the other. And that's what's so beautiful is you find really what tools help you shift your nervous system, and then you have that tool for the rest of your life.
Mm.
Because as you're saying, environmental things always happen. There will always be something. There's never a shortage of triggers or challenges or hard things that come up. But when you know how your body is responding and you have the flexibility to move yourself back, again, it just kind of gives you the power to be the one responding rather than reacting in your life.
Because things around you will continue to happen.
Always. Doesn't end. Yeah. No, there's no shortage.
Yeah, just wanna be able to have that regulation of moving through so that you can move back to
Yes.
the good feelings rather than
Yeah.
it sticking with you for, like,
Yeah.
weeks, potentially.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So within that, I guess there's pieces of, like, burnout, negative thoughts, and
Mhm.
habits, that we can
Mhm.
kinda get into.
Sure.
So how can we work to shift those negative thought patterns?
So again, I you can either start with the bodies because 80% comes from the body. Sometimes shifting what is physically being experienced in the body with somatic practices, movement practices. Um, it's a really fascinating experience that when the nervous system changes, the thoughts in your brain change. So when you're in a dorsal shutdown place, that's a burnout place. That's a place of last resort. You've tried to take action, you've tried to do things, kind of there's no gas left in the tank. And what's interesting is the thoughts in that place are really of hopelessness and challenge, and it's not going to work, and this is never going to work. And so sometimes just shifting the body state, it will change those thought practices. The other piece is doing what so many coaches do, what so many therapists do in cognitive behavioral therapy, of just naming our thoughts, creating that little bit of space and gap between, okay, yes, brains think thoughts all day long. That's what brains do. Hearts beat, brains think. That does not mean that every thought that is thought is true or helpful or serving you. And I find just kind of creating some distance between your thoughts to become a conscious witnesser of your thoughts without judgment, without shame. Again, we all think lots of thoughts. Then you have that space and again, that flexibility to start changing them. I think one detrimental piece is kind of this false idea, that kind of the toxic positivity. If I just think positive thoughts, or if I write my affirmations every morning, that will shift things, and it oversimplifies what our brains are actually meant to do and how they work. So I love affirmations. I love those kinds of things, but you really want to make sure your nervous system is in ventral vagal, in that place where actually there's congruence between what your physiology is saying is real and true for the world, and then what you're visioning, or what you're seeking to achieve. Because your body won't believe you if you're totally stressed out or totally burnt out, and it's like, I am strong and powerful, everything good is coming to me. Like, it just, and we do, that's what we kind of feel like, we're gaslighting ourselves, we're like, this is not real, and then it doesn't work. So it's naming that and knowing that there is those identifying thought patterns is really helpful, and the physiology of your nervous system kind of below it as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I can think of examples of marketing like, you're thinking about maybe you've been focusing on social media and it's not really working or something isn't clicking. You can
Mhm.
start to speak really negatively about yourself and how it's your fault. Or like
Mhm.
blame like the algorithm, the like
Oh,
nameless,
yeah.
faceless,
Mhm.
whatever,
Mhm.
instead of
Mhm.
looking at it and being like, okay, how am I not enjoying this? Taking away from the numbers piece, obviously, but how am I how could I make this more fun for me? Or how could I connect with people more? How could I have one on one conversations with people more? Who am I
Mhm.
following? How am I showing up to social media? Am I logging
Mhm.
onto the app? And the things that I'm seeing before I click post are
Right.
actually putting me in a um, kind of like a negative thought process right before I post the content. Um, and how then you can figure out what to do about it. But if you kind of just push through and don't really think about where
Mhm.
those thoughts are coming from or anything, then you're just kind of like, this doesn't work. And then nothing really, like, the progress doesn't happen.
We're not
Yeah.
gonna take effective action. We're probably not gonna take any action if we're having that negative critic and that, um, pretty mean voice in our head and pretty negative voice, a pretty doubtful voice, right? As business owners, as entrepreneurs, like, so much of our work is like holding fast to the vision and seeing what's possible and knowing what's coming and knowing that even if it's not here yet, like that we keep moving forward and our communities and our potential clients and our audience feels that energy from us. And that's actually what the physiology says. Like our nervous systems are constantly reading each other and getting those clues, whether that's even just from a static picture of yourself and even from, the words or the tone, especially if you're doing video in your content creation, that your nervous system is speaking to your audience. And so that whole notion of like, fake it till you make it is not true. It doesn't line up because these nervous systems of ours are so smart and have evolved over millennia, um, millions of years to really understand another person's energy, another person's safety. And in marketing we talk all about like you want people to know, like, and trust you. Well, that comes from that coming from an authentic and a congruent place. It's not from a forced place, which is why this work has been kind of so powerful for me from a marketing perspective. Obviously it's what I teach to people for their health, but from a marketing perspective, it's really kind of lines up for success in that area too.
Totally. And I'm thinking of, you know, things that match up with that, like being in your values. And maybe you only do social media or emailing or blogging when you're in the right headspace for it.
Mhm.
And that's why I like kind of I've had quite a generalist approach to marketing throughout my whole career. And I really like that because it's like if right now blogging doesn't feel like it's right for you, then you're gonna have that mental block of what should I post? How often should I post?
Right.
Is this really going anywhere? And so then you maybe don't publish as often, or it
Mhm.
just takes you so much more energy to
Mhm.
pull yourself to do it. Um, that you can pick up something else and find that maybe something like having a conversation like this is more of the flow that they're interested in.
Mhm.
And then the task that they see is like, okay, well, I have to reach out to people and invite them on and think of what we're going to talk about. But then the rest is kind of it just happens rather than it being
Mhm.
like I have to
Mhm.
spend 4 hours trudging through and doing this research and whatever their process is. That you can just kind of like it's not just like take your foot off the gas pedal and then at another time you're gonna put it back on. It's like you can actually decide to drive on a different road, and that's fine too.
And I
Mhm.
love that confidence and trusting yourself and knowing. I mean, I think that that's a really key piece of stopping the looking outside of ourselves and all the gurus and like the have tos and the shoulds. And yeah, trusting your intuition, trusting your body, trusting your energy to kind of like, okay, it's not right. And I could, like you're saying, I can move to a different road that feels more like ease
Yeah.
rather than the slog.
Yeah, and sometimes we use the same language to have the 2 different reasons of why we wanna do something, like, "Oh, I should have an email list," or, "I should have a podcast," and sometimes it's because somebody told you you should have one, and sometimes
Mhm.
it's because when you record a podcast, you feel really lit up and it's really interesting to you, so you're
Mhm.
like, "I should
Mhm.
do more of this."
Yeah.
So sometimes we'll say the same thing before we put it on our to-do list, but there's actually a very different, like, thought pattern behind the why and like the, I guess, strategy behind it of like, have you come up with a strategy with it? Or is it just like you feel like you should because so and so is, or everyone is, or people keep talking about how that what like the blogging industry or the podcasting industry is growing. Um yeah, and then you see situations like the last 6 months where you see layoffs left, right, and center, and you're like, oh, wait, am I? Whereas if you had made that decision because you like podcasting, then does it
Mhm.
matter that like Spotify is not, spending as much in the last 6 months of, like, acquiring shows. It's like,
Mhm.
it's kind of indifferent to me. I didn't really think I was ever gonna get acquired, I just keep on going. Whereas if maybe, like, the reasoning for doing something is rooted in some external should,
Yes.
um, and then the negative thought patterns start again because it's like, "I was wrong. I didn't make that calculation correctly," or whatever. Um and yeah, following your intuition, instead of just being like, "What's my gut feeling about this?"
Mhm. And that gut feeling, so that is ventral vagal. So we use
Mm,
lots of language for it, kind of intuition, gut feeling. That is that place where you're kind of most congruent in your, and you can feel it. It's a more powerful energy, and so it is more impactful. Again, kind of wherever you seek to step out into that. But you can, yeah. So neuroception is kind of this idea of the nervous system. It's your body's way of intuition.
yeah. How can you tell when it's my intuition is telling me to hold myself back and, like, more in that turtle mode
Mhm.
versus the gut feeling of the ventral vagal? Is there, like, a way that people can tell the difference between the 2?
So I think what's really powerful is what is the thought pattern coming up. So there's the physical sensation. So this is where mapping is really helpful because again, for me, like when I am in dorsal, when I'm in shutdown, like my shoulders are closed. So I can get clues from lots of different ways. So my shoulders are closed, like there's a pit in my stomach. My brain feels empty. Like you can't think in that place. Again, it's the place of last resort versus when my body's in ventral vagal, like my shoulders are open, I'm relaxed, there's like an ease to my breath. There's like an ease around my eyes. And this sounds like it might be complicated to do, but again, you've been living with your nervous system your whole life. Like sometimes it just takes a couple times of kind of going through that process. And again, with that free quiz, I kind of give some free resources of how to feel your body and some resources for mapping your own system. But so for me, it's checking in with what's the state of my body, and then what are the thoughts that are coming in that state. So if the thoughts are in the place of I'm connected, I'm peaceful, easeful, um, then I trust that. Then I know that's that place. That's that place that is reliable and is gonna be the place of the most impact. Again, from a marketing perspective or a relationship perspective, just even having a conversation with a partner, versus what's my body feeling and I think it's always really important that our nervous system is only ever seeking to serve our survival. And so our nervous system doesn't have the executive function. That's where we do get to bring the brain in and be like, okay, right now my nervous system is saying I should shut down and this is really dangerous and place of last resort. But actually, that's just a kind of conditioned response from something that happened in the past. And I, today, as Leah, get to look at the situation and decide, do I need that nervous system reaction right now? Because again, the nervous system is not making a value judgment. There's no should within the nervous system. It just responds. But then we get to decide like, huh, do I need that response right now? Is this actually, am I shutting down? Because the example I'm thinking of, like having a challenging conversation with your partner, or maybe you're having a conversation about your business and where the income is, those conversations tend to like really elicit a lot of reaction from us. And yes, we're going to have an automatic reaction. Again, that's what nervous systems do. But then we get to use our brain and our cognitive function to be like, wait, this actually is a good conversation. I'm safe in this conversation. Like my partner really cares about me. This is a realistic and reasonable and good conversation to be having right now. And what can I do to help my nervous system kind of move back to that place of a ventral vagal so that I'm attached to that place of knowing?
Yeah.
So that was long-winded. I hope that
No,
answered.
but I mean, it's complicated, like
Yeah.
it's not a surface level solution. Yeah, no, I really like that yeah, figuring out the where and what from, and yeah, just because something feels maybe a little scary, that it doesn't mean that you have to then pull back and not do it.
That's where we get to use our fully developed frontal lobe. Yeah, to be like, "Okay, yes, I'm scared," or this is, um, yes, and I like to say, "Yes, and."
Yeah, and it's kind of that thing of, like, as we get older, we just get better at articulating how we're feeling and asking different questions and of ourselves and others, and, like, having those conversations so that it's not, um, you know, you have the one message back and forth from you and your partner, and then you have to go away and think for extended periods of time before you can finish the conversation.
Right.
Like maybe a smaller kid has to think about how they're feeling,
Mhm,
potentially. Yeah, I really like that of connecting to the what's happening and just taking it from there.
mhm,
But yeah, also being able to tell the difference. If someone is in that dorsal mode and they are maybe in burnout, is
mhm.
there I think timing is kind of a big thing of, like, people think especially when people are thinking, "This is how it's gonna be for the rest of my life."
Yes,
And then
yes.
you bring that back to, you would hope that you could solve it within a couple of hours. But sometimes it can take, 6 months, a year, whatever, to, figure out, especially depending on if you've got something else going on. Um, how can people continue to show up and, like, because the thing is with any task every task takes a different amount of energy from me to
Mhm.
do. Like, shooting back and forth some emails, that's somewhat easy, assuming they're not like emotionally charged
Yeah.
conversations. Um, Kind of just like coordinating something as one set, maybe like thinking of how I'm going to break down this marketing concept and how I'm going to explain it in a blog post or a series or a book, for example.
Mhm,
They all take different amounts of my energy.
mhm.
um, so then if you're, like, on the cusp of burnout or burning out, things take longer, like, in terms of I can only do 2 hours of that mental thinking today, and then I need to pause and rest and relax. How can people, I guess, like, have some patience? How do they, yeah, do that piece of, um, when things take longer to figure out, how can they, uh, have it that the time isn't then becoming a whole whole 'nother factor that's stressing them out?
Right, so they're imagining, "This is hard, I don't wanna be in this place, it's gonna take time to get out of that place," and I guess I would challenge the thought that it takes time to get out. Certainly, there can be time associated with, maybe changing structure if there's been too many things on your plate and you really need to renegotiate, um, boundaries or things like that, but I just noticed that thought that things take time. So again, our nervous system at every moment, all three nervous system states are always available to us. And the understanding that I think brings a lot of hope to people, which is I think what you're kind of getting at, is even if you can't touch ventral vagal today for whatever reason. And again, that's my goal is to give you, yeah, I have like a library of over 300 different or 300, that's incorrect, 30 different body-based techniques so that you can move, because that's a really hard place to even make a decision. If you only have if you're assessing that, okay, I'm burnt out, I need to get this work done, I can only do things for 2 hours, like, how do you even choose? And so, the goal is that we use these body-based techniques to move you from that dorsal place to feel the ventral place again, to move back into. Does that mean that you're still gonna need to make, again, perhaps boundaries, decisions about what your work life looks like, decisions about, um, if this is the right work for you? There's so many pieces that kind of go into the question of burnout. Do I need to go see a physician and get some labs drawn or get an imaging study done? Like, these are all, we all need to make decisions about how to find the way out of it. But I think what's so encouraging about the nervous system is those three states always exist. Again, even if you can't feel the ventral vagal, there's a little bit of like hope that that is still there. Your nervous system knows how to get you back to that place. Your subconscious mind knows how to get you back to that place. And with some pretty simple, again, kind of body based things that I teach, you can feel that and have the capacity and kind of, again, that space within your brain to make your next decision. And always honoring, what I appreciated what you said in there is rest, like honoring our true humanity, that we're not machines. We're not intended to work 18 and 20 hours a day. And we really do need all the pieces: sunshine and plenty of water and rest and rejuvenation. And, especially with entrepreneurs and people who love what they do, there's like this tendency to just keep working. And sometimes that overworking can be rooted in where we're sourcing our value, our worth, our expectation of self or expectation of others. And so it kind of works on detangling some of those things, but always knowing that that nervous system state is, it's always there. We can find our way back to it. And even if we can't, even if we spend 23 hours in dorsal, or 23 hours and 58 minutes to touch for 2 minutes. And my goal is always, how do we do this with more ease? Because we're all busy. We all have so many things on our plate. Like, the last thing we need is like, here's the 15 things you need to add to your plate to, spend more time in ventral vagal. So I really try to incorporate it into people's lives. And there's a cool technique actually that you might be interested in. It's called a glimmer. Have you ever heard of a glimmer?
No.
Okay, so a glimmer, this is really neat. And people, your audience that's listening, you can take this right now with you, and it can be something that will impact your day and your life moving forward. So a trigger is, physiologically, it's the opposite of a trigger. So we all know what a trigger is. We all have different things that trigger us. And trigger being like, you feel your heart rate go up, you feel your palms start sweating. We've all had that experience. A glimmer is the opposite. So a glimmer is when you get the sense that things are okay. So you kind of exhale a little bit. Again, maybe there's a little softening around your eyes. It could be as simple as, I like to think oftentimes it's like when you receive an unexpected kindness, like somebody buys your coffee in front of you, and that feeling that you get where you're like, oh, like the world is good, people are nice. Or you even see it, like I saw a mom help another mom get her kid out of a car today. And it was just like that. Oh my gosh, like everybody's good. Things are okay. We're connected. That is the ventral vagal place. And it's really hard to stop what you're doing. But the cool part is, if you can spend 10 to 15 seconds is all it takes, just like, I feel this. I feel this connection and goodness, and an exhale, that starts to change your nervous system. And when we kind of ask our nervous system and our subconscious to like find glimmers, you'll start to notice more of them. and you can set specific ones for yourself. So, like, some people, it's nature, just even like stopping at your desk, spending 10 to 15 seconds, that's all it takes, like looking at a plant and just being okay. Um, I've set the glimmer, and again, we're meaning making beings. We get to create whatever meanings we want. Whenever I see multiple numbers, so you pick up your phone to send a text, or you're writing an email and you look up at your clock and it's 11:11, that you just pause for 10 to 15 seconds and say, like, oh, that's that, like, again, instead of a trigger, that's a glimmer that even with all the things that are going on and the things on my plate, like, I'm okay. That's what ventral vagal is. Like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
So that's a cool thing to kind of look for. And it doesn't take getting up an hour earlier and doing it just happens in
Yes.
the course of your day. And the more time we spend with our nervous system kind of associating into ventral vagal, the easier it is to, again, flexibly move, because it's not a problem to go into dorsal. We just want to get back.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I've often thought of, especially with the chronic illness journey that I've been on, is that the light at the end of the tunnel.
Hmm.
And at sometimes I have been keeping that light bulb updated, and sometimes somebody else, like a doctor or
Hmm.
whatever, might have been changing out that light bulb for me to keep it going. Of like, you do a test and it doesn't necessarily tell you
Hmm.
anything, but the glimmer is that there is also another test that we can do.
Hmm.
So you're always kind of moving forward in it. Um, but that there is kind of the same thing of like maybe you're DIYing your website and you're figuring out little things. And every time you figure something out, you have that little glimmer of like, I can do this. I'm good.
Yeah, and, like, sink into it. Like, I know it's silly, but like 10 seconds is all it takes to change neural traits. And, like, you can, Rick Hansen has said, like, if you practice a neural trait, then can it become your emotional state. Like, but again, it doesn't take us 20 minutes of deep meditation practice. Like, you can do this. It takes a tiny bit of discipline to notice it. And then just, like, again, we're so busy and we're so moving so quickly through our lives that even me, like, I have to be like, no, literally, Leah, you have to take 3 breaths right now, just 3 breaths. And just stop. What? Yeah, exactly. If you're DIYing on the website and you figured something out, like, just take 3 breaths of really trying to kind of feel what that feels like in your body and notice it.
Yeah, and sometimes just taking those 10 seconds is the like celebration that you need. I'm also thinking of like, I wonder if it'll be good if I like keep a little like a list of glimmer in my phone. And so I can see like at the end of the day, I can take a note of like, okay, these were the 3 things that I was like really conscious of.
Hmm.
Were there any more that I didn't necessarily stop and think about, but you know, and some of those are going to be work things and some of them are going to be personal things. And that's cool. But yeah, then you can look at like, maybe I didn't tick off and like complete something on my to-do list where I would get that dopamine hit, but I had that glimmer moment. And so therefore, like I'm still working in my body, and like enjoying it. Mm,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah. Um, with that, one of those things that you mentioned, I think when we were talking previously, maybe before we started pressing record, was the healthy habits piece.
Hmm.
How can people tell? And maybe there's that glimmer moment in there of like, is this habit really healthy? You know how like there's ones that we know that we shouldn't maybe be doing, like scrolling
Hmm.
on TikTok for 2 hours.
Right.
It gives us that enjoyment, but is it the deep rooted enjoyment and joy? Um, but those more nuanced in between things, how can we tell whether they're healthy and complementing our nervous system or whether they're pushing us more into that dysregulated?
Well, right. So, I mean, one is recognizing that I think a couple pieces to healthy habits is definitely we know what is good for us, and recognizing that we have a society that is really, many of the pieces point to keeping you as dysregulated as possible. And because when we're in that dysregulated place, which is really the cortisol place, so because cortisol is active in sympathetic and dorsal shutdown, more so in sympathetic, but that, and cortisol we know is, one of the leading causes of inflammation, and so much of disease is rooted in inflammation, is recognizing, like when you were saying scrolling on TikTok, like it makes us kind of feel good. And I think questioning that, does it make me actually feel good? And then knowing that cortisol is more addictive than nicotine. So often what it is it's like, I know I don't want to do this thing, right? And yet, why do I keep coming back to it? Why do I keep doing it? And then we kind of get in that really critical pattern in our head. So one, again, just like aware, just know that like it's hard because it's hard. It's hard to stop that habit because it is um, it, physiologically what's happening in your body and the kind of neurochemical cascade that happens in habits. Um, can be hard to interrupt if we're not aware of like how to create that joyful state or blissful state, like you were saying, a ventral vagal on our own. I think I don't know. I find it hard to if I can't. I'm trying to think of the example that you're thinking of, like a habit that we maybe isn't that good for us
I'm
that
also
we would
thinking of
want.
things, how, like, people will follow people on social media that they don't necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
like?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't fully light them up, but, like, they might get ideas from their content or something like that, or maybe something where people societally feel like they need to.
Yeah, I know that place where you kind of are like convincing yourself that
Yeah.
I have to follow that person because that's they give lots of ideas or something like that, and yeah, I don't exactly align with them. I would argue I think it goes back to more what you were saying at the beginning, like that inner confidence to know what's for me and what's not for me, and trusting your gut and your intuition. So, reactivity, doing something out of, again, whether that's habit or that's just it's what everybody's doing. I mean, we think we've evolved beyond that, but belonging is really important to us, and other people's opinions can be really important to us. And again, this is where mapping your nervous system can be really helpful because you can be like, wait, when I see that person's content, when that feed like scrolls through my Instagram or whatever, like, what do I actually feel? Do I feel a glimmer of like deep exhale and like life is good, or does that make me feel bad about myself? Does it make me get that? Again, it's so micro moments, but it's what's so cool is like, soon as you see it, you're like, oh, that person is actually giving me more of a flavor of dorsal energy of like, I'm not good enough and I don't compare and I'm never going to be as good as them. And it's like, huh. Now, when you see that, you're like, do I really want that? Because now, again, this pause in the space gives you the power to choose. But when we're just scrolling and we're not really aware of what it's doing to us, then it feels like it's not that bad of a habit, right?
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal. But so I guess, yeah, in that context, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And I wonder if too there's just an element of, like, consciously doing things instead of because so much of habit is, like, you do it without really even thinking about it.
Hmm.
Um, but more, like, consciously looking at things, and if anyone is wondering, like, "But I have to follow them because they're a friend or whatever. Like, I don't wanna unfollow them, I just wanna deal with my feelings or whatever." Remember that you can mute people for, like, 30
Yeah.
days or whatever that social media lets you do. And then, by that time, maybe your brain has completely shifted and you're
Yeah.
all good seeing it again, because I've noticed over time that, like, certain things that used to make me feel good, now I, like, bring up that comparison or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but it is just temporary. So
Hmm.
there's also that piece. What if someone has, like, a fear of something? Like, a fear of
Hmm.
showing up on camera, a fear of maybe people thinking a certain way about them, or maybe, like, a fear of public speaking. How can they, and maybe it's mapping it as well, but, how can they work through those pieces?
Right. So it's recognizing that fear kind of hangs out. Fear is, again, this idea of And our nervous system is like really extreme. It kind of like works in black and white. That's where we get to bring in our cognitive function. Like, you know that it is not life or death to show up on social media or do a video or speak in front of a group of people. I mean, the comparison people always give with public speaking is like people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy at the funeral. But our nervous system, again, when you think about what our nervous system has had to do in order to get us to this moment, to get humanity to this moment, um, it required us to create these millisecond, instantaneous reactions. And so, again, no shame or judgment. Like, thank you, body. Thank you, nervous system of all of my ancestors that came before me that helped get to this moment. And when I feel fear, again, fear hangs out in sympathetic activation. That's probably the most common place. Yes, it's some in dorsal, but I find it to be more of a sympathetic place. And so it's creating, again, the space within your own experience to see the fear, name the fear, decide what you want to do about the fear, rather than just the reaction. I feel afraid to post something on social media or share my voice or be seen. And so, because it's an evolutionary reaction that is meant to protect you, like it takes over, it wins, like, and it will stop you. And so and then you fight with yourself because it's like, I wanted to do that thing. I wanted to post that content. I wanted to do this thing. Why didn't I do it? And just recognizing that our nervous system can be our friend rather than that we can work with the reactivity that it has and create the space to then choose, because it's all about our ability to choose what it is we want to do. Does this work align with where I'm going with my business, or what I'm seeking for in my health? And so then we can choose. And that's where so some of these body-based techniques, I teach about how to shift into peripheral vision and how to kind of use bilateral stimulation. I use a lot of neuroplasticity and a lot of the subconscious mind work because, as we were kind of talking about habit a little bit ago, 90% of what we do, what we think, how we behave is these subconscious loops, and it's that subconscious that's really connected to this nervous system. So it's, again, the body gives us this cool way into that subconscious that's controlling so much of how we're showing up or not showing up. But so I would say, first, map your nervous system, find some practices that allow you just the tiniest bit of pause or space when that fear comes up. And then know that we can, with our brain, we can shift the emotional attachment. So, it tends to be one thing, right? Like, or a few things. The fear comes up around XYZ, around walking into a room where you're doing networking in person and you have to meet a lot of people. And like right before you get to that door frame, when you're going to walk in the room, like the heart starts beating and the social anxiety comes up and the fear comes up. It's like our brains are really cool and really malleable, and that's what has been amazing about kind of science in the last 30 years of how much we can, through, um, our own efforts, really change the emotional track of these external things that happen. So I think this idea that we don't need to change the external situations, we can change things internally, and so you can continue to engage in life, and life can continue to life, and external situations can change because we actually now know how to change that internal experience or that emotional experience of the external stimuli.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. It's making me think of so many different things where I can, like, rewire my brain and my body a little bit.
You can. All the evidence, all the functional MRIs show so much conclusive evidence that
Yeah.
we have that capability. We absolutely can all do that.
Yeah, and so many of them are like, such small little things, but, like, the compounding effect of it all comes together. Um, and then one last thing that I really want you to explain for the listeners is
Yeah.
that, when someone you were speaking earlier about, before we started recording, about how when you see someone's content, you've really been impacted by, like, 3 people. Um, Three People Deep. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so there's a great book by John Barr. I I'll get you the exact last name, but the title of the book is Before You Know It, and it's research. He's the lead researcher out of Yale University, and for the last 30, 40 years, they've been studying the subconscious mind and how what's happening in our environment, what kind of primed experiences we have when we're young, how it impacts what we automatically do, what we automatically think, what we automatically feel. And one of the really interesting research is they're now looking at like what happens to our thinking and our feeling in relation to social media, because now that's a part of the evidence base and part of where people are researching is and this speaks to the nervous system as well, that our nervous systems are always reading each other. We're always reading each other's nervous system state. And they found in the research that when you see something on social media, yes, you're kind of experiencing the energy, the nervous system state of that person, and three people deep of whoever that person has had contact with. So again, your subconscious and your nervous system is receiving information that is more than kind of what we just think of this two-dimensional or three-dimensional staring at a screen, and is influencing then what we do next, which is, I mean, kind of wild and kind of crazy. But I, I think for me, what's cool about that is when we become more aware of that reality, again, then there's the power to kind of choose, well, what does that mean? And how am I kind of safeguarding what I'm in, what content I am interacting with, and how is it impacting me down the road?
Yeah, totally. Um, and all of that unknown of who that influence is. Like, you know who you're talking to, but you don't know what their influences were.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book. And it's something crazy like our subconscious mind is interpreting 11 million bits of data from our senses every second. Our conscious mind interprets, again, depending on which research you look at, between 40 and 100 bits of information.
Wow.
So there's a big filtering system happening. But what's cool is you can then use if we can use that filtering system to help us be conscientious about what we're paying attention to, what we're being intentional of, and how we show up in the world, what our health looks like, what our business looks like, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. Oh, so many things to think about. I feel like we have just like covered the very tip of the iceberg here. But so many things to think of. So tell the listeners where they can find you and learn more about what you do.
Absolutely. So I am on Instagram and LinkedIn. So come find me on either platform for at Lea Durante NP. And then my website is leadurante.com. I've got that free nervous system quiz. It's really fun. It's like 7 questions for you to start to understand yourself. And then I have a longer for folks who kind of want to dig into more of the meat. I do have an ebook that's at leadurante.com/ebook. So folks can come find me there. And I work with all kinds of folks who are really interested in utilizing this science to change their experience of stress, burnout, mental health, physical health.
Yeah, amazing. Um, yeah, and I just think there's so many ways that this can impact both business, but also marketing. And how, if maybe people sat down at the start of the year and thought about their marketing plan, but then maybe had a few thoughts of how is that going to happen? How is that possible? And how am I going to show up and do these things? I can see how this will impact them over the course of the year.
Yeah, so it gives them the power kind of back into their body when those
Mhm.
fears come up or those doubts come up, to really have a concrete way to get them back into that headspace that we're all in at the end of December and early January, when we've got the big vision and we've got the big plan, like how to get back into that flow and that energy so that you can take the action that you want to and need to for, again, kind of life, fitness, health, business, all of it. It's all about how we show up and the decisions we make on a daily basis.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh my gosh, so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Digital Hive podcast. I hope this episode got you thinking about the smaller things and how they impact how much energy you have to work on your business and your marketing. If there are items in your marketing plan or goals that you've been resisting working on, now would be the time to reflect on that rather than waiting months or to the end of the year. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd truly appreciate it if you could share it with a friend or on Instagram and tag me at Honeypot Digital. To find out more about Honeypot Digital and the marketing strategy and coaching work I do, or to find more marketing resources, head to honeypotdigital.com.